This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN.
What's up, Wisecrack? Michael here, and today we're going to settle one of the most contentious feuds in Hollywood once and for all. Marvel movies. Deep or dumb? Okay, not quite, but if you're a fan of both Martin Scorsese films and the MCU, you might have felt a bit spurned by your film dad dropping a warm one on the thing you like.
My concern is losing the screens to massive theme park films, which I say again, are their own new art form.
He contends that theme park movies are boxing out the real cinema made by folks like Greta Gerwig and Paul Thomas Anderson. Now, I am not here to tell you to like or dislike Marvel movies, but this whole argument gets at a question I find much more interesting. What is this high art type of cinema that Scorsese wants to protect, and does it even exist? So let's find out in this Wisecrack edition on Martin Scorsese versus the MCU. And as always, spoilers ahead. But before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN secures your data with industry-leading measures by using uncrackable encryption and the most secure VPN protocols. That means that when you use their VPN, you're securing your personal information and online activity. To ensure even further protection, they maintain a strict no-log policy, which means that they won't collect or share your data. Surfshark is jam-packed with a ton of extra features, including Surfshark Alert, which sends you a notification if your information appears in a leak. There is also Surfshark Search, which works as an extra ad block to allow for a peaceful browsing session. One subscription will allow you to protect all your favorite devices, and there are apps for all your favorites, like PC, Mac, Android, Chrome, Firefox, Amazon Fire Stick, and even your Xbox and PlayStation. If you're not completely satisfied, they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so check it out today. Go to surfshark.deal/wisecrack and get 83% off your plan with an extra 3 months for free. Now, back to the show. In case you missed the op-eds, essays, and interviews in which Scorsese has waxed poetic about the grim state of modern cinema, here's the gist. He thinks that back in the 60s and 70s, the New Hollywood movement made the film industry a site of artistic risk and creative revelation. Audiences were willing to be challenged, and filmmakers were in competition with each other to see who could push the art form to new heights. Think Stanley Kubrick, Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola. But according to Scorsese, this golden age is long gone, and now popular cinema is just an occasion to sell merchandise and build theme park attractions. As he says in a New York Times opinion piece, the situation, sadly, is that we now have two separate fields. There's worldwide audiovisual entertainment and there's cinema. They still overlap from time to time, but that's becoming increasingly rare. And I fear that the financial dominance of one is being used to marginalize and even belittle the existence of the other. And the biggest symbol of this cultural decline, apparently, is none other than Kevin Feige's vessel of cinematic destruction, the MCU. Now, to be fair, much of Scorsese's criticism has been overblown in the media. He hasn't said that the filmmakers behind the MCU should be sent to gulags for their crimes, or that those of us who enjoy these movies are idiots who never should have been born. But he's said things like this. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk. The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. So for Scorsese, the MCU doesn't deserve the C in its name. That is, unless we had two more C's for Marvel Capitalist Cultural Commodity Universe, the MCCCU. Now, we're not going to say Marty's criticism isn't grounded in some reality, but he's essentially making an age-old criticism, that there are two kinds of art, elevated art and art for the masses, and the latter is bad and dumb. This kind of criticism has been lodged from philosophers like Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer in the 1940s, as well as basically every pretentious person you've ever met. But here's the thing. Some of the high art people love to praise was, historically speaking, not a real thing. Enter William Shakespeare, the pinnacle of highbrow literary culture, who was actually a dude who made entertainment full of dirty jokes that was widely appealing to the illiterate masses. Now, when I say William Shakespeare, you might immediately think about a stuffy English teacher or books that only Rory Gilmore could understand. But Shakespeare was always for the people. While those with money to blow could pay for a seat at the Globe Theater, all the common folk could pay a penny for standing room where they'd shove and yell and heckle the actors. Shakespeare even calls them out in Henry VIII, where he describes youth that thunder at a playhouse and fight over half-eaten apples. why would you fight over a half-eaten one unless there's peanut butter on it? Without saying that Marvel is modern-day Shakespeare, it's worth noting that mass appeal was similarly baked into the popularity of every literary snob's preferred bard. Even in America, hundreds of years later, Shakespeare was still very much for the people. At playhouses around the country, from the theaters of Philadelphia to the rough stages west of the Mississippi, everyone was going to see Shakespeare productions. And not only did everyone love his plays, but folks from all stripes of society could also recite their favorite lines. Much like how today one might recite their favorite 2 Chainz lyrics while doing the dishes.
My favorite dish is turkey lasagna. Even my pajamas designer.
Scholar Lawrence W. Levine paints a picture of just how down-to-earth and non-pretentious the theater was back in the day. To envision 19th century theater audiences correctly, one might do well to visit a contemporary sporting event in which the spectators not only are similarly heterogeneous, but are also, in the manner of both the 19th century and the Elizabethan era, more than an audience. They are participants. And by participants, he means audience members doing stuff that wouldn't even fly at a Jacksonville Limp Bizkit show. They'd cheer and boo and throw dead geese at the stage. This obviously wasn't limited to Shakespeare. The term peanut gallery comes from the days of vaudeville, where working class theater goers in the cheap section would throw peanuts at performers, and not just as a friendly reminder to eat high protein snacks. Scholars like Levine have noted that the spirit, while shocking by today's standards, had a certain democratic flair. The theater was a place that belonged to everyone, but that was going to change as the 20th century dawned. See, that's when well-to-do Americans started separating high art from the so-called lower ranks of society. And by that, we mean they wanted to solidify their class position and exclude immigrants. One simple trick they used was to remove the farce portion of productions, that is, comedic interludes that the masses looking for a good time loved. Eventually, the theater turned from a place for everyone into a place for only proper members of society. According to Levine, if Shakespeare had been an integral part of mainstream culture in the 19th century, in the 20th, he'd become part of polite culture, an essential ingredient in a complex we call significantly legitimate theater. He'd become the possession of the educated portions of society. So the masses, no longer welcome in the exclusive halls of theater, filled the seats of movie theaters instead, gathering for a more accessible type of entertainment with much better snacks. According to Levine, now a worker could take his wife and 3 children to the movies for the price of 1 gallery seat at the regular theater. And while this might sound like something that Scorsese, the first Avenger of cinema, would love, the Nickelodeons of the early 19th century were looked at as places for low-class bozos who wouldn't appreciate the theater. As high art became more and more of a signifier of the upper class, anything that produced a group atmosphere, a mass ethos, was culturally suspect. This group atmosphere certainly describes Marvel movies, where fans dress up and scream their heads off when Tony Stark gets the upper hand on the big purple talking scrotum. And like the original cinemas, this mass appeal becomes suspicious to the defenders of high art. Levine writes, while crediting Susan Sontag for the idea, that the emerging distinction between high and low culture was based in part on an evaluation of the difference between unique and mass-produced objects. If the specificity of a theatrical performance was unique, then the singular film printed on celluloid and played on screens around the country was just an object of mass culture, no different than the pre-packaged Twinkie. As this tendency grew, culture was now firmly split into high art and popular art, which was the type of thing that was commercially available to everyone, even those wearing work boots. Indeed, a 1913 article in The Nation argued that movies were not a very high art, and they revealed the common predilection of the popular taste for the lurid and the fantastic, and required no thought or little attention. Which 100 years later sounds like Scorsese talking about those of us who get advance tickets for a new MCU movie. But ironically, way back when, it was precisely Scorsese's beloved medium that was considered a place for the riffraff to amuse themselves, while folks with tailored garments and opinions on poetry occupied themselves at the theater. Now, even if we acknowledge that the whole idea of cultural hierarchy in America has always been somewhat problematic, if not completely misguided, we can still ask whether or not Scorsese still has a point about the MCU films being uniquely damaging to cinema. To go back to his theme park argument, as he puts it, honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being, which would be very understandable if all he watched was Thor: The Dark World. So if that's the case, totally fair, and sorry for bothering you, Mr. Scorsese. While we're not sure which, if any, MCU film Scorsese has seen, it seems like he'd at least be able to tolerate a film like Captain America: The Winter Soldier. It's a straight-up political thriller explicitly influenced by the type of 70s cinema that Scorsese reveres so much. The Russo brothers, who directed the film, described their first meeting with Marvel like this. We came in, sat down, and he told us that they wanted a 70s thriller-inspired movie. Well, we grew up on 70s thrillers. We're film geeks. We used to watch The Late Show with our dad when we were kids, French Connection, Parallax View. So the fact that it was Captain America and a 70s thriller, it really sunk into our sweet spot. So rather than creating an on-screen theme park, the Russo brothers were earnestly trying to channel these iconic thrillers to make something that explored human psychology. And if we're trying to find Marty an example of an MCU film earnestly conveying genuine human emotion, I humbly submit the Guardians of the Galaxy films. Sure, they feature an anthropomorphic tree and a blue-faced dude who has a death arrow powered by whistling. But they're also about lost and lonely individuals coming together, forming a new family, and finding collective strength and courage. And the second Guardians film concludes on one of the most emotionally compelling moments of the entire MCU. After Yondu gives his life to save Peter Quill, we watch a gorgeous space funeral to commemorate his sacrifice. If you saw that moment in the theater and couldn't help but notice the adult man bawling his eyes out behind you, there is a very good chance we were at the same screening, and I'm not sorry. It's just a couple of examples, but it at least shows how even if the MCU is a multi-billion-dollar operation run by Walt Disney's Frozen Head, which is of course not hidden under the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, these films are often still trying to do the types of things that Scorsese would seemingly consider characteristic of real cinema. To be clear, we're not trying to make the argument that MCU films are high cinematic art.
They got my dick message!
We're simply saying that popular films are not categorically trash, and can often be pretty good, or at least entertaining. And this is easy to acknowledge once we let go of the temptation to fall into the high art, popular art distinction. As the AV Club's Alex McLeavy said when writing about the Scorsese MCU kerfuffle, rather than attempting to return to some gatekeeping of the canon, criticism can retain the best elements of poptimism in its arsenal, making room for art and entertainment that has been marginalized in the past, and resisting the urge to snark and mock that which isn't attempting to do anything more than grant some fleeting corporate-sponsored diversion to people's lives. While Scorsese is undoubtedly one of the greatest to ever do it, even he's made some films that don't exactly scream high art. He's been criticized for over-glorifying violence and being maybe a little too obsessed with stories about Italian Americans who like to make pasta sauce and do murder. He also directed a film in which we see Jonah Hill's prosthetic penis, which feels more Judd Apatow than Jean-Luc Godard. And of course, his most recent film is a Netflix movie that's 30 minutes longer than Endgame and features about as much CGI for the sole purpose of making two old guys look slightly less old. And speaking of the artistic value of mafia stories, here is what high art connoisseur and philosopher Theodore Adorno had to say about popular films. In an age of spiritual disenchantment, the individual experiences the need for substitute images of the divine. It obtains these through pseudo-culture, Hollywood idols, soaps, novels, pop tunes, lyrics, and film genres such as the Wild West or the Mafia movie fashion substitute mythologies for the masses. So I guess one man's vapid mythology for the masses is another's work of high art. And to be clear, Goodfellas rips, but as one of my esteemed colleagues so eloquently put it, isn't Scorsese just Marvel for Italian Americans? And it's telling that here, Adorno, another member of the cult of high art, is criticizing westerns and mafia films for doing the same type of pop culture mythologizing that MCU movies are accused of by critics. While we've already talked about the Russo brothers, they aren't the only MCU directors with some genuine artistic cred. Taika Waititi more or less brought the Thor franchise back from the dead with with Thor Ragnarok, a box office and critical success. And Waititi seems to be someone Scorsese would respect, having made films like Hunt for the Wilder People and Jojo Rabbit, both of which received critical acclaim and the latter of which won a bunch of awards, including beating out Scorsese's The Irishman for Best Adapted Screenplay. But the filmmaker who is most poised to complicate Scorsese's criticisms of contemporary cinema is Chloe Zhao, who just won Oscars for Best Picture and Best Director for her film Nomadland, and previously won multiple independent awards for her first two films, Songs My Brothers Taught Me and The Rider. In many ways, Zhao represents everything that Scorsese thinks is good about cinema, and is set to be one of the faces of the next generation of American filmmaking. Oh, and she also directed Eternals, a forthcoming MCU film about immortal aliens who protect the Earth from a group of bad guys called the Deviants, a film she was hired to direct in 2018 before achieving any real mainstream success. Now, did Zhao just direct an MCU film so she would secure the Disney bag and fund whatever hyper-specific low-budget film she wants to make next? Maybe. But in a recent interview, she sounds pretty enthusiastic about the creative freedom she had, saying, "I shot exactly the way I wanted to, 360 degrees on the same camera as I did on Nomadland. Same rigs. It's a bit surreal. I think I got lucky in that Marvel wants to take risks and do something different." While we'll all have to wait until November to see Zhao's MCU debut, I think it's worth at least speculating that she has the potential to be a sort of dialectical synthesis to the dichotomy between art and worldwide audiovisual entertainment set up by Scorsese. And just like how in the 19th century, American theaters were able to appeal to high and low culture, maybe there's a future where both normies and cinephiles alike can find something to enjoy in big budget comic book movies. We'll give the last word to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse director Peter Ramsey, who called Scorsese a god before adding, "Marvel movies are fun and good. Chill. Chill indeed, Peter. Chill indeed." But what do you guys think? Does Scorsese have a point about massive corporations sucking all the soul and artistry out of the film industry? Or is he just mad that none of us were able to get through The Irishman in one sitting? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support. Throw a goose at that subscribe button like you're a 14th century theater goer, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.